Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down. Never.
When the mental improvements, better engines, stealth coatings, avionics upgrades, and weapons systems that pushed the boundary of what was possible. But this revelation suggested a turning point, a leap so significant that the very nature of aerial dominance itself would never look the same again. The jet was not just another new model rolling off an assembly line, it was the embodiment of decades of experimentation converging into something that blurred the line between science fiction and reality. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The first striking element of this creation was its speed. Fighters like the F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II had already represented extraordinary leaps in stealth and agility, but this new machine existed on a level that exceeded expectations. It was designed not simply to outrun threats, but to erase them before they could even be considered threats. With propulsion systems that allowed for sustained hypersonic speeds, it redefined what it meant for a fighter to control the air. Traditional radar tracking and missile interception systems designed for jets that still moved within a predictable envelope simply could not keep up. This jet could enter contested airspace, accomplish its mission, and vanish before adversaries had a chance to react. Equally transformative was its stealth. Previous stealth aircraft relied on carefully angled surfaces, radar-absorbing materials, and electronic countermeasures. The new jet combined these with cutting-edge adaptive skin technology, capable of changing its electromagnetic signature in real time. This meant that the jet could disguise itself against detection systems, appearing as a bird, a civilian aircraft, or nothing at all depending on the scenario. Its invisibility was not just passive, it was active, dynamic, and intelligent. An adversary scanning the skies might think they were seeing harmless clutter on their radar screen, while the most advanced warplane in history was soaring directly overhead. The cockpit, or what could loosely be called one, reflected an entirely new philosophy of design. Pilots no longer operated in the way they had for generations. Instead of relying on a panel of gauges, switches, and displays, the jet utilized full helmet integration where information was projected seamlessly into the pilot's vision. Every element of the battlefield was rendered in augmented reality, giving the pilot a 360-degree awareness that no canopy or camera could ever provide on its own. In many respects, the human operator had become almost secondary, more a supervisor than a controller, since much of the jet's function was autonomously managed by artificial intelligence systems. This AI integration was perhaps the most revolutionary component of all. Where previous generations of jets had relied on human reflexes and training, the new system introduced decision-making speeds that far outstripped human capability. The artificial intelligence on board could evaluate threats, deploy countermeasures, chart flight paths, and even prioritize objectives at a pace no human could match. Pilots were still there, but more as commanders issuing broad directives rather than manually flying every maneuver. In combat terms, this meant the fighter jet operated with an efficiency and lethality that could not be rivaled by manned or unmanned systems relying solely on human oversight. Its weapons were no less staggering. Traditional air-to-air and air-to-ground munitions had been reimagined with energy-based systems supplementing kinetic weaponry. Directed energy weapons allowed the aircraft to strike targets with pinpoint precision at the speed of light. Enemy missiles could be vaporized mid-flight, ground targets disabled without collateral destruction, and enemy fighters neutralized long before they reached visual range. For the first time, a jet had become not just a machine of destruction, but an almost impenetrable shield against any form of aerial assault. The implications of such a platform went far beyond the battlefield. The existence of this jet redefined deterrence. For decades, nuclear weapons had been the great equalizer, forcing even the most advanced nations to hesitate in their pursuit of outright conflict. Now, however, air dominance had returned to the forefront, and the United States found itself wielding a tool that provided overwhelming superiority without the catastrophic implications of nuclear arms. This jet was a message. The skies could once again be dominated by technology, precision, and control rather than brute destructive force. Its development also underscored the hidden world of black projects. For years, speculation had swirled about advanced prototypes being tested in remote desert ranges, whispered reports of aircraft performing maneuvers that seemed impossible under known physics. The announcement confirmed that behind closed doors, research had not only continued but had flourished. Billions of dollars and decades of effort had been poured into refining technologies once thought speculative: scramjet engines, adaptive camouflage, and quantum-based communication systems. The jet was not born overnight, but was the culmination of countless smaller breakthroughs, each one pushing the envelope until the impossible had become inevitable. The industrial base behind the fighter was equally important. It reflected a new level of collaboration between government, military, and private industry. Aerospace giants worked alongside AI pioneers, material scientists, and even biotech firms to create a platform that was not simply a machine, but a hybrid of disciplines. Every rivet, every circuit, every line of code represented the cutting edge of human ingenuity. This fusion ensured that the aircraft was not bound by the limitations of traditional defense projects, which often struggled to integrate innovation across different fields. What made the announcement even more remarkable was the sense that the Air Force had revealed only a fraction of what the jet was capable of. Military institutions are notoriously cautious in disclosing the full extent of their capabilities, and the decision to acknowledge its existence implied that the aircraft was already years ahead of what was admitted. If the world was being told that it existed, one could only imagine how much further its classified abilities extended. The message was clear: if this was what could be shown, then what remained hidden was even more formidable. The geopolitical ripple effect was immediate and undeniable. Nations that had spent years investing in their own fifth-generation fighters suddenly found themselves contemplating obsolescence. The balance of power in the air had shifted dramatically, forcing adversaries to reconsider strategies that had relied on parity or incremental advantage. No amount of pilot training or numerical superiority could overcome a platform that essentially could not be detected, tracked, or stopped. In many ways, it redefined what an arms race looked like in the 21st century, not about who could field the most planes, but about who could keep pace with an entirely new generation of aerial warfare. Yet beneath the celebration of technological triumph lay deeper questions about the future of warfare. A fighter jet that could not be stopped posed moral and ethical challenges. The very concept of invincibility raised concerns about unchecked power and the temptation to use such dominance freely. If no adversary could realistically fight back, would restraint prevail, or would the possession of such a weapon embolden more aggressive policies? The debate extended beyond strategy into philosophy, forcing leaders and citizens alike to grapple with what it meant for one nation to hold such an unassailable tool of war. The symbolism of the jet was also profound. It represented the culmination of human ambition to dominate the skies, a dream that had existed since the Wright brothers first lifted into the air. From the fragile biplanes of World War I to the supersonic interceptors of the Cold War, every generation had reached higher, faster, and deadlier. This creation was the apex of that journey, a manifestation of the belief that technology could overcome any obstacle, that speed, stealth, and intelligence could converge into something unstoppable. It was not merely a machine, it was a statement about human progress itself. Its training protocols reshaped what it meant to be a pilot. No longer was the emphasis solely on stick and rudder skills or dogfighting maneuvers. Instead, pilots were trained to think like tacticians, coordinators of immense computational power, guiding a system that was as much partner as vehicle. The bond between human and machine was deeper than ever, creating a synergy where instinct and algorithm operated in harmony. This shift redefined what air combat training academies focused on, producing not just pilots but hybrid operators of man-machine teams. The unveiling also hinted at an acceleration of military doctrine. With such an asset available, traditional concepts like air superiority, close air support, and interdiction could be carried out with levels of precision and safety previously unimaginable. Missions that once required fleets of supporting aircraft could now be accomplished by a single platform, reducing risk, cost, and complexity. The jet was not just another fighter, it was an entire air campaign condensed into one system, capable of projecting force, defending itself, and returning unscathed. The reaction among allies was a mixture of relief and unease. On one hand, the United States possessing such a capability reinforced the protection offered by existing defense agreements. On the other hand, it widened the technological gap between America and even its closest partners. The jet symbolized dominance, but dominance has a way of reshaping relationships, even friendly ones. Nations dependent on U.S. air power would inevitably recalibrate their expectations, knowing that their own arsenals were suddenly generations behind. Within the Air Force itself, the jet was more than hardware. It was a symbol of identity. It reminded the service of its original purpose, to control the air with overwhelming superiority. For a branch sometimes challenged by questions of relevance in an age of cyber warfare and space operations, the jet reasserted its primacy. It was a statement that the Air Force was still the tip of the spear, still the guardian of the skies, and still the service that pushed the limits of what was possible. As engineers, pilots, and strategists looked at this marvel, one truth became undeniable. The age of incrementalism in fighter design had ended. What the world now faced was a paradigm shift, one that would ripple through defense budgets, alliances, and the very psychology of global power. To admit that such a jet existed was to admit that the rules of the game had changed. The Air Force had not just created a machine, they had redrawn the boundaries of what air dominance meant in the modern era. The revelation of a fighter jet so advanced that it defied all previous measures of defense was not simply a technological milestone, it was a cultural and psychological shockwave that spread far beyond the confines of military institutions. For years, speculation had grown around secretive U.S. projects, whispered accounts of experimental aircraft sighted at night, and the enigmatic presence of bases like Area 51. The admission by the Air Force that such a machine truly existed shattered the boundary between rumor and reality, giving substance to what had long been considered conjecture. Suddenly, the veil was lifted and the future of aerial warfare appeared not on the horizon but already in the skies. One of the domains transformed by the announcement was global intelligence. Agencies across the world immediately re-examined their assumptions. Surveillance strategies, early warning systems, and defensive doctrines all depended on a certain predictability, that enemy aircraft could be tracked, targeted, and intercepted. The new fighter negated that foundation. Satellites designed to detect heat signatures struggled against propulsion systems engineered for concealment. Radar grids that blanketed entire nations became obsolete against adaptive stealth. The calculus of intelligence gathering itself was overturned, forcing nations to question whether their eyes in the sky could truly see at all. Defense planning underwent an equally radical upheaval. For decades, the principle of mutually assured vulnerability had defined air combat. Every aircraft, no matter how advanced, carried some risk of being countered. This kept balance in the skies. With the U.S. fielding a jet immune to such counteraction, balance tilted into a lopsided dominance. Adversaries who had invested billions in modernizing their own fleets suddenly found their efforts rendered irrelevant. Sophisticated missile defense systems, meticulously developed to challenge stealth aircraft, became as ineffective as outdated anti-aircraft guns. The realization was stark. Entire national strategies could unravel because of one machine. The economic dimension was just as profound. The global arms industry had always thrived on competition, with countries racing to match or surpass each other's capabilities. The fighter jet disrupted that model by creating an insurmountable gap. Manufacturers in rival nations now faced the prospect of pouring resources into projects doomed to fall short. Meanwhile, American defense contractors, already leaders in innovation, found themselves elevated to an untouchable status. Their expertise had not just delivered a weapon, it had secured dominance in the defense marketplace, with allies and partners clamoring for access to even partial versions of the technology. Diplomatic dynamics shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. The unveiling of such a weapon was not simply a matter of military pride. It was a deliberate signal to the world. The United States had, without firing a shot, reminded every nation of its unparalleled technological superiority. This had a dual effect. Allies felt reassured by the protective umbrella such power represented, while adversaries were forced into a posture of caution. Negotiations, alliances, and even trade discussions could not ignore the shadow of a jet that embodied unstoppable force. Every handshake, every summit, carried with it the unspoken knowledge that one party held an ace the other could never match. Culturally, the jet ignited imaginations. For generations raised on films and stories of futuristic aircraft, the announcement blurred the line between fiction and reality. Artists, writers, and filmmakers found themselves scrambling to capture a world in which such technology was not just possible, but already operational. The archetype of the invincible machine, long relegated to comic books and science fiction, was suddenly grounded in fact. The broader public, accustomed to incremental news of military updates, now grappled with the awe of realizing that their nation commanded something out of legend. Academia also felt the tremors. Universities and research institutions that had contributed in small ways to materials science, propulsion, or artificial intelligence suddenly found themselves linked, however distantly, to the creation of a world-shaping weapon. This spurred an explosion of interest among young scientists and engineers eager to contribute to projects that operated at the edge of possibility. It also provoked fierce debate in ethics departments, where scholars asked hard questions about responsibility. Was it right to celebrate a technology that concentrated so much destructive potential in one platform? What did it mean for the future of global peace if one nation wielded an unstoppable instrument of war? The announcement also reshaped the psychology of deterrence. Traditional deterrence relied on the fear of equal retaliation. A nation contemplating aggression had to weigh the likelihood of suffering similar consequences. But with the arrival of a fighter jet immune to conventional countermeasures, deterrence became asymmetric. An adversary could no longer rely on the possibility of striking back in kind. This one-sidedness fundamentally altered decision-making at the highest levels of government. Strategic planners had to account for the reality that U.S. air power could intervene anywhere, anytime, without realistic opposition. The knowledge alone carried a deterrent effect more powerful than any stockpile of missiles. Inside the Air Force, the jet became a catalyst for reimagining the very identity of air dominance. Its capabilities were so far beyond those of existing fleets that it forced a reevaluation of doctrine. No longer did squadrons need to be massed in overwhelming numbers. A single aircraft could achieve what once required dozens. This efficiency meant that strategies could shift from attrition to precision. The Air Force could project power globally with fewer assets, reducing logistical burdens while increasing effectiveness. Training programs, too, were reshaped, emphasizing strategic thinking and coordination over traditional dogfighting skills. The presence of artificial intelligence within the jet carried implications that extended beyond combat. By entrusting life-or-death decisions to algorithms, the Air Force had crossed a threshold that many had debated for years. The machine's autonomy meant that its split-second responses outpaced human cognition. But this raised questions about accountability. If a jet engaged a target incorrectly, where did responsibility lie? With the pilot, the engineers, or the AI itself? The act of revealing the jet also revealed that this ethical line had already been crossed in practice, forcing society to catch up with decisions that had been made behind closed doors. Another ripple effect lay in the realm of space. Air dominance had always been tied to the atmosphere, but the jet's capabilities hinted at a blurring of boundaries. With propulsion that hinted at exo-atmospheric maneuverability and communication systems that leveraged satellite constellations, the line between Air Force and Space Force grew increasingly thin. Analysts speculated that the jet was not just designed for Earth's skies, but could potentially interact with orbital theaters, intercepting satellites or defending space assets. If true, then the fighter represented the first step toward merging air and space warfare into a seamless domain. The industrial secrecy that produced the jet also carried symbolic weight. Projects of such magnitude required not only immense funding, but also extraordinary compartmentalization. Thousands of individuals might have contributed components without ever realizing the full scope of what they were building. This demonstrated the ability of the U.S. defense establishment to conceal extraordinary advances while projecting only incremental progress to the outside world. The very fact that the jet could exist in secrecy until the moment of revelation underscored the capacity for control and discipline in managing advanced technology. The psychological impact on rival pilots was particularly striking. For decades, aviators around the world had trained with the belief that skill, bravery, and tactics could tilt the odds in their favor. The knowledge that an opponent's aircraft was not only invisible, but untouchable, dismantled that belief. The courage of taking to the skies against a peer adversary was replaced with the futility of facing an unbeatable machine. This shift carried profound consequences for morale, not just among pilots but across the armed forces of nations suddenly rendered vulnerable. Domestically, the fighter became a symbol of pride and controversy. Citizens celebrated the achievement as proof that American innovation remained unrivaled, a triumph of ingenuity and determination. Yet at the same time, voices questioned the cost. How many billions, perhaps trillions, had been diverted into creating a weapon while social challenges at home went underfunded? The existence of the jet reignited the perennial debate about priorities, the balance between national defense and domestic welfare. It was a reminder that triumph in one domain often carried hidden sacrifices in another. Beyond the tangible, the jet represented a philosophy of inevitability. It suggested that technological progress, once envisioned, could not be stopped. Ideas that began as speculative dreams, hypersonic propulsion, adaptive stealth, energy-based weapons, were destined eventually to be realized. The Air Force's admission proved that human imagination, when paired with determination and resources, would manifest in hardware that redefined possibility itself. For better or worse, the sky had once again been claimed not by nature, but by human ambition. The cultural resonance of the announcement spread into education. Young students, inspired by headlines of an unstoppable fighter, began to view science and engineering not as abstract disciplines, but as pathways to shaping the future. Classrooms buzzed with discussions about propulsion, energy systems, and artificial intelligence. Teachers leveraged the news to inspire curiosity, showing that the formulas and theories on the chalkboard could someday build machines that changed the course of history. The jet, though military in nature, ignited a spark of creativity across civilian society. The sheer existence of the fighter also introduced an undercurrent of unease. If one nation could field such a platform, what might follow? The imagination leapt ahead. Swarms of invincible drones, fleets of unstoppable